What is going on, guys? So today's video is leading on from that first anabolic exposure or first cycle video, and if you haven't checked it out, please go back and do give it a watch, because leading on from this video I will be making a few assumptions, one of them being that you have found your tolerable testosterone dose, i.e. the dose of testosterone that you can simply tolerate without exhibiting negative estrogenic feedback, you know, things like gyno. From that point I will be making an assumption that we have spent long enough using testosterone only, and that you are now at a point where you're looking at where to go next within your stack design and cycle setup. Now, of course, there's a few myths that I'm just going to cross out here straight away from the beginning, because it might seem a bit full on how we go from just using testosterone to looking at these other compounds that I'm going to talk about today. But firstly, there's this big bro myth going around from the olden days that you must be using over a gram of total anabolics before you can even consider utilizing things like growth hormone or insulin, exogenous insulin. And to be quite frank with you, it is absolutely ludicrous, right? It is very stupid to think that you must be hitting a certain dose of one or a few pathways to then be able to utilize other signaling pathways within the body to drive anabolism. So where we're going with this video is how to set up your stack design. Quite simply, you want to be using as many different signaling pathways within the human body to drive up and turn on anabolism, right? But the idea and concept is that you use multiple different pathways with a lower dose across each pathway to acquire a much greater synergistic drive of anabolism, okay? Rather than just utilizing only steroids alone, you could then look at activating these other pathways I've mentioned. So firstly, before I start diving into the other pathways, looking at anabolics alone, so you've got testosterone as a base, we also have two separate pathways that revolve around anabolic and androgenic steroids, that being the derivatives from testosterone, i.e. DHT derivatives, or dihydrotestosterone derivatives such as Masteron or Primo, and your 19-norandrones such as Trenbolone, Nandrolone, Deca. So within within anabolic and androgenic steroids alone, there is three signaling pathways there that you can utilize to drive up anabolism. One being testosterone, the androstane pathway, DHT derivatives, and 19-norandrones. So the first protocol will be to say, once you've found your ideal testosterone tolerance dose, or you've reached a point of using enough testosterone within your milligram per kilogram scale that it seems illogical to utilize or push more, or you're looking to drive up a desired cosmetic effect, you can start to look at utilizing these other two pathways. Just without going into too much detail into the specificity of, you know, using DHT derivatives and 19-norandrolone derivatives, just as a quick broad spectrum, I will dive into every single one of these pathways within their own retrospective video or videos for some of the more complicated ones. But 19-norandrolones shouldn't really be utilized for too long, you know, short durations of exposure due to the high increase of neurotoxicity that they do drive. Now, DHT derivatives being slightly more friendly to the human body would be more preferable to utilize during the growth phase, as you can utilize a longer duration of exposure without exhibiting necessarily the same high demand of stress and fatigue on the body and the body's organs, looking at brain, heart, kidney, liver, pancreas, etc. Whereas 19-norandrones, as I said, can be extremely neurotoxic. So dose of everything is obviously dose dependent in what I've just said there. If you use too much of anything, it's going to have problems. But the 19-nors tend to be better preferred to fat loss phases, where you can utilize using them for 6, 8, 12-week period windows of short-term exposure, low dose, to achieve a desired outcome. So outside of anabolic and androgenic steroids, what other pathways within the body do we have available to us? So straight away, I mentioned at the beginning of that video about that silly old bro rule of got to be using a gram of total anabolics to utilize growth hormone. Growth hormone acts along a separate pathway to anabolic and androgenic steroids to driving up anabolism, specifically its interaction with IGF-1, or even more specifically skeletal muscle, the IGF-1 found in skeletal muscle tissue. So there you have another pathway that doesn't drive up anymore on these separate pathways. It is of its own entity. So the stress applied will be applied through this pathway within the body. So there's 4 pathways you can activate straight away. This will allow you to utilize less across each to drive up more anabolism without having to exhaust or abuse one singular pathway. You will get a greater desired outcome by utilizing multiple than you will just exhausting one. Another one to think about would be exogenous insulin, fast and slow acting insulin. That is a separate pathway in and of itself. Metformin, telmisartan, not necessarily directly, but with a cause and effect further on down the line of the pathway, they do drive up anabolism. Telmisartan being an incredible angiotensin II receptor blocker and a very, very good PPAR. Metformin controlling oxidative stress and improving insulin sensitivity. So they have 7 pathways already that you can activate and utilize. Now, last one, the 8th, L-carnitine. Now, this isn't the same as your supplemented L-carnitine. I did do an IGTV video on my Instagram going into injectable L-carnitine and why it differs to your supplemented forms of L-carnitine. But essentially, L-carnitine acts in synergy, so it acts synergistically with compounds such as growth hormone and insulin to further increase the efficiency of the dose you are taking, i.e. you get more out of the dose. So you don't necessarily need to take more to achieve a greater desired outcome. Now, conveniently, what we see here across this, what this actual model is called, referred to by most people now, quite popular phrase to call it, is a safer use model. Well, all this is a polypharmacy model. The idea of just utilizing multiple different pathways within the human body to achieve a similar desired outcome, i.e. to drive up anabolism. Now, L-carnitine works in synergy with growth hormone and insulin. Growth hormone and insulin all work in synergy with anabolics. So each and every one of these pathways has a synergistic value to one another. So i.e. each will have a benefit on the correlating pathway, driving it up even further. So increasing its efficiency to do the job at hand. So hopefully you can get the idea of where we're going next within your stack design. So the idea, of course, providing that funds and it is feasible, because some of the things like growth hormone can be quite expensive. The next step within designing your stack would be to look at utilizing, say you're in a growth phase, look at utilizing another anabolic that runs along the DHT pathway. Then maybe growth hormone, insulin if the carbohydrate requirement is there to utilize a slow acting insulin or to utilize a fast acting insulin around the workout window. L-carnitine to suffice a better outcome in synergy with the growth hormone and the insulin, and then metformin and telmisartan, they should be in your stack design anyway for the health and longevity benefits. So hopefully guys, you can understand and see now where it is better to utilize less across multiple different pathways that all act in synergy with each other than just to simply blast one or a few pathways. If you just abuse, I say abuse, but if you just blast, one pathway or just a few, so just anabolic and androgenic steroids alone, and you are just using heavy cycles of AASs, anabolic and androgenic steroids, you're gonna run into more problems than if you were to use slightly yet less and utilize these other pathways alongside. So there you have it guys, that is the gist of where to go next. Now, obviously, each one of these pathways, from the anabolic and androgenic steroids, growth hormone, insulin, telmisartan, metformin, and L-carnitine, will all require their own topic of conversation. Growth hormone is an extremely unique compound and a very complicated compound that does an incredibly large amount of things within the human body. And thus, each will require their own topic of conversation, diving into them a little bit further and looking at the ins and outs of why we would use them. But if you are looking at where to go next, this is where I suggest to start. Activating a DHT pathway or the 19-noradrenaline pathway, or both, dependent on phase or where you're at and the goal at hand. Obviously, that needs analysis is important. You need to see what you need to do to achieve the desired outcome. Look at utilizing something like growth hormone, insulin, telmisartan, metformin, and L-carnitine. That is the basis of where to go next once you have set or found your tolerable testosterone limit. But yes guys, I will be back again next week, of course, with more diving into the world of bodybuilding, PEDs and enhancements, training, nutrition, etc. So that's it from me. Peace.